Hotep.
Black people have been wrong. Black people have been wrong. Black people have been wrong. As I said earlier, for knowledge of self.
Hotep.
I'm your host and with God. Hotep Jesus. Hotep Jesus. Hotep, you're a genius. HotepJesus.com. Oh, this is a real Hotep brother. Oh, this is a real Hotep brother.
Yes, sir. You know what time it is. It's grifting season. Time to get our grift on. We're going to be talking about the woke right tonight. We got the incomparable Dave Smith coming on the platform. You know, we got an extra special edition of the Grift Report hitting the tubes tonight. Your little bit of nighttime content. I think you're gonna enjoy this one. I think you're really gonna enjoy it. We gotta get to the bottom of this thing. And who better to do it but moi?
Black people have been wrong. Black people have been wrong. Black people have been wrong. As I said earlier, for knowledge of self.
Hotep.
I'm your host and with
Yes,
God.
sir.
Hotep Jesus. Hotep Jesus. Hotep, you're a genius. HotepJesus.com. Oh, this is a real Hotep brother. Oh, this is a real Hotep brother. I'm your host and with
Make sure y'all hit that subscribe and follow button.
Hotep.
More importantly, hit that share button.
Hotep, you're a genius. HotepJesus.com. Oh, this is a real Hotep brother. Oh, this is a real Hotep brother.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have for you tonight a very special edition of the Grift Report with husband, father, comedian, dictator of the libertarians, the problem child, host of Part of the Problem podcast, and he likes to moonlight as Joe Rogan's bodyguard, comic Dave Smith. Dave Smith, welcome to the platform. I should say welcome back to the platform, man. Good to have you back.
It's good to be back, man. Thank you for having me again.
Yeah, I wish it could have been under better circumstances and more positive things to talk about, but we're right in the middle of a transitional period, a very deep transitional period with a new leader taking power. DJT, we're leaving the old man behind that, well, he can't do much. And we're going back to the MAGA regime. Tonight we're talking about woke right. Now, last time I was on this channel with a special guest, I had on one of your besties, James Lindsay. I want to talk about that. I want to talk about the contentions with James Lindsay. I put James Lindsay through the woke right test. And after further review, I think he failed. But I liked him. You know, I gave him his third strike after further review. But he's not extreme woke right. We'll be putting you through the same test as well tonight to see if you're the woke right. But this tweet popped up on my timeline, which led to this conversation. You said the bottom line is that the term woke right makes perfect sense when applied to pro-Israel right-wingers. The parallels are obvious. The term makes no sense when applied to America First non-interventionists. It's embarrassing to see people twist themselves into pretzels defending this accusation. Let's debate this. It's an important topic, especially right now. James Lindsay won't defend his garbage analysis, so who will? Now, when I saw this, I was like, oh, damn, shots is fired. I think I gave James Lindsay his third strike for not taking the debate with you. I think that's what the third strike was. I was like, that's what makes him woke right. Do you want to respond to that? Look like he's about to say something.
Well, I mean, I should just say things got kind of nasty in the back and forth between me and James, but I don't really hate the guy or anything like that. He like took offense to something I said when I was on Tucker Carlson last time. That wasn't about him at all, but he kind of took offense. And then I don't remember why he started with me this last time, but I am very quick to kind of just give it back on Twitter. You know, it's
What'd he
Twitter. So if
say?
someone comes at you, you kind of come back at them. You know, I don't actually remember exactly what
Okay.
it was, but I will say that if I'm just being honest, yeah, like I watched like the first half hour of him on your show.
Okay.
And it's just his reasoning, I think, is all over the place and kind of sloppy and doesn't really make any sense. It's just, I think the argument is very sloppy. He was sitting there when he starts discussing the woke right, he kind of starts getting into like these vague characteristics that could describe any political movement. Like they're mean. They're not, you know, they're not well behaved. Like, okay, I mean, I get called gay on Twitter all the time. You know, like what? It's like how is this even relevant? Like what? We all get that. That's what Twitter is. Every single group does that. You know, and there's all these kind of I don't know, these things that I've heard him argue on other shows where it's like, well, they have a belief around identity. You're like, yeah, that describes every group of political actors. That's not what anyone thinks of when they think of woke. However, and this is what I've been saying for quite a while now, there's the group of, say, like the Ben Shapiro right wingers or whatever you want to call them.
Here we go. Okay.
Well, the parallels are just obvious. I mean, they spend their entire careers railing against these snowflakes on college campuses. And then as soon as the topic is Israel, it's the exact same tactics. All of what everybody, when normal people say the word woke, what they're thinking of is the exact same thing. They call you a bigot as soon as you make any point. Doesn't matter what you say. It's just, if it's not in there, if it's critical of Israel, you're a bigot. I mean, the examples are all over the place. Thomas Massey said that America's broke. We're $35 trillion in debt. We can't afford to pay for other countries' wars. And John Podhoretz called him anti-Semitic filth for saying that, for making an argument that we're broke. We can't pay for that. So like all over the place, the conversation gets shut down with accusations of bigotry if you ever bring anything up.
Yeah.
I think you know this personally.
I don't know nothing about this. I don't know what you're talking about.
I must be confusing you. I'm confusing you with somebody else. I'm sorry. My mistake. But so it's like there's that. Then they actually have it like, and they in many instances have used the power of government, laws cracking down on speech in several different states because there's an unsafe environment on college campuses. You see chants are violence now. It's like there's just these obvious parallels. And so at the same time, while this is going on, so I was labeling people woke right. I mean, it's kind of in my circles, like it's always been a running thing. That's what we make fun of these kind of like these right-wing Zionists for, is that they're the woke on Israel. They're social justice warriors when it comes to any policy related to Israel. I remember Ben Shapiro in 2012 called Ron Paul a Jew hater. That's just like what they used to say. Ron Paul, who's never said a word about the Jews ever, is aside from what Thomas Massey said, maybe that we shouldn't be funding Israel, but he doesn't want to fund anything. But so I just think like I don't know. It's right there. They're literally telling you that there's the words are violence. People ought to be canceled for not having the approved opinion. You're called a bigot as soon as you have a different view than them. So while there's this one group where the pop label of what people think of woke just completely applies. And then you have James Lindsay and I think Konstantin Kassin also were like talking about, and what they do is not only are they these vague definitions of what makes this wing of the right wing right, but it's a constant moving target where they go like, oh, like Tucker Carlson, and like I know between the two of them, they've named Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, my buddy Daryl Cooper. I should say I'm friends with all of them, but which is probably why I kind of took this thing a little bit personally. But these guys, so they name them. They go, they're the woke right. And then when you pin James down and ask him to explain what the woke right is, he starts going into like the Jew haters online or the Christian nationalists or like
Yeah.
these other groups, and you're like, yeah, but that's not like, these are different groups, man, and you just smeared them, and now you're like trying to hit these guys over here, and it's just I don't know. It seems whatever. I don't really care about fighting over this term. I'm just pointing out the obvious hypocrisy among so many of these like Israel supporting Republicans. But like it's just like the term fits in this way. It doesn't make any sense and isn't useful at all in the way that I think James and Constantine are trying to use it. And also, it does seem to me that, you know, it always, this label, the characteristic that all the people have in common who they're calling woke right seems to be that they don't support the war in Ukraine and they don't support the war in Gaza. That seems to be every right-winger who doesn't fall into one of those categories seems to be the ones who are getting labeled like, oh, they're woke. They're just like the leftists. And I think that's bullshit.
I want to come back to that point, but real fast. Outside of the Zionists and the pro-Israel people, is there another group of people or any other way that we can apply this term woke right to people? Or for you, is it just the pro-Israel, the Justice Zionists fall into that category?
Well, the reason why I just enjoy pointing that out is because I just think there are guys, again, like who, and everybody kind of knows the people I'm talking about, but who they made their bones. In many cases, they made millions and millions of dollars off of like going into college campuses and just like, like, you know, like destroying 19-year-olds for behaving like fucking 7-year-olds and being like, yo, what's wrong with you? Like, you can't just scream words at people. You can't just like not listen to what the other person is saying. You can't like say you're 20 and you need a safe space or trigger warnings. Like, grow the fuck up and all that, you know? And then it's like, I mean, look here, take this as an example, okay? And just like, I don't know why we can't be real with these conversations, but okay, you know, there's like that famous clip of Ben Shapiro where he's reading off, he's like arguing with those black lefty professors or whatever, and he just starts reading off like the black like crime statistics and illegitimacy rates in the black community and criminality in the black community and all that. So, you know, and he's Ben Shapiro, so he's rattling them off, you know, well, you explain to me why blacks are 50% of the da-da-da and 75% of the da-da-da and da-da-da, you know, and he's just, you know, take the gloves off. Hey, here's some harsh medicine, black community. And these are the stats. And by the way, I'm not saying I'm against that. Like, I don't know. Sometimes it's okay to take the gloves off and give some harsh medicine. And hey, if you want to counter his argument, you know, whatever. But imagine anyone did that with Jews. Like, just imagine the reaction that Ben Shapiro would have over that. And so can you not look at that and just go, that type of blatant hypocrisy, like you just can't have both, man. This is too like, and so I know it's kind of popular to, of course, just like always kind of trash, like, oh, the Groypers are out there and they say dumb, you know, the fans say dumb shit on Twitter. It's like, yeah, okay, it's true. But then there's these far more powerful forces that are so like, they're so hypocritical. So anyway, my point of using the term woke is just to point out to guys like that like, you had no principles the whole time. You were a hypocrite. You don't really believe that. You were just attacking an out group, but when it comes to your group, then it's a whole different thing. Or when it comes to, in many cases, they're not Jewish people. They're just people who, you know what I mean? Like, for whatever reason, react that way to criticism of Israel. So that's the purpose of using that term for me, was always just to point out that like you guys become everything you claim to hate. I remember watching Ron DeSantis after he made his whole like thing off. I'm the guy who will take on the woke and no more teaching third graders about trans and all this shit. And then and this is way before October 7th. This is before this current round of the war. He was asked about like anti-Semitism on college campuses, and he starts going off about how he'll be the harshest on it and he'll make sure people are kicked out of schools and he'll make sure there are consequences. And it's like, wait, for because some and you know, it's the same as the shit on the left, right? Once you kind of start doing that shit, once you start politicizing and weaponizing claims of bigotry, it creates like an industry for those claims, you know? And then there's like just more and more people making the claims. And then they make the claims in situations where it doesn't even apply at all, you know? And then pretty soon it becomes like, oh, anybody who's like, if anyone is protesting Israel's war, then, you know what I mean? They must hate Jews. They're all anti-Semitic. They should all be punished, which, by the way, around the country, a whole bunch of them have been like pretty severely punished, kicked out of schools, kicked out of clubs, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Well, it seems pretty woke to me.
Well, I just want to say, I did get a chance to read James Lindsay's essay on the woke right. I thought it was fantastically written. I thought he identified the group well. I know you probably saw something different in my interview with him, but I thought he identified it well, right? So let's kind of go to the identification of woke right? And I think really what it is, it's just the term woke applied to a certain political side, right? So if it's woke, it could be woke right, it could be woke Hotep, it could be woke whatever, right? Woke libertarian, right? It's just the term woke.
There are definitely woke libertarians, for sure.
Oh, shit, here we go. Things couldn't get any fucking worse. So, when we think about the woke right, I think you've identified something that was perfectly said. You said these people have no principles. And to me, that's what I started to notice from amongst many of these people in the woke right. They have no principles, right? Now I see you as a principled guy. You've been standing on your square. You haven't moved much, right? However, I think we got to come up with a term for you, a new term. What's the equivalent of a Jew coon? Because you're Jewish, but you're anti-Semitic, so you're like a Jew coon. They call you what is a Jew coon, or we just call it a Jew coon?
Oh man, I don't know. It's all so hilarious and ridiculous, man. But
you can't do this.
Well,
Dave.
I'm a Putin propagandist, and I'm like I'm a Hamas lover, evidently, and also like a self-hating Jew. It's a lot. It's a lot to have all of that going on, but it's but this is always, and this is why I think, I know you've read a lot of this stuff too, but this is where I always really do think that I benefited a lot from reading really good like libertarian literature, is that there is something about like, and it's not like to be individualistic in some like human beings are atomized creatures that only exist as individuals. Like obviously human beings are individuals who form into collectives and form communities and have, and have like, there's like, we're a social animal, but where you just recognize that we are individuals who make up groups, and then rulers like governments always try to create this illusion that like they are you and you are them, and you know what I mean, like that's America, and that's, if somebody stormed the Capitol, that's America's house, you see, and that's like that's you, that is America. If you criticize the government, what do you hate, America? You're down at, by the way, this was one of James Lindsay's critiques of what the woke right is. They're always blaming America. It's like, well, what does that even mean, blaming America? Like the criminals in DC, if I blame them, then I hate you. You know what I mean? Like, what is that? And there's the same exact game is done by the Zionists with Israel. That it's like, except they extend that to all Jews around the world. So if you have any problem with anything Israel's doing, that must be because you're anti-Semitic. Or if you point out that like any Jews, like did something wrong, then that means you hate all Jews or something like that. But that's just like, it's stupid. That's not actually how human beings operate. At least I don't think in modern culture, I certainly don't think so. I don't think like most people are blaming like just some random Jewish guy who didn't do anything to anyone. And I don't think that most people, in the same way that I would say like if conservatives are like reading off something about black crime stats or something like that, I don't think that necessarily means they hate all black people, like I like, even if their argument might be flawed or missing something, I don't think that necessarily, it's like, and that's the problem with this, like these accusations of anti-Semitism or racism or all this shit. It's like, no one's ever like, what precisely do you mean by that? Like, what even do you mean when you say these things? Because I've heard the anti-Semitism thing gets applied to almost anybody who's critical of Israel or Israel's influence on America in any way.
We're gonna have to break this down, but I just want to put a disclaimer out there. I love Jewish people. I love the Jews. I'm a Zionist. So I just want to make sure we get that out in the clear. I'm a black Zionist, so shout out to the Holy Land. If you guys want to pay for my trip to come out there and leave a 5-star review on Yelp, hit me up. But anyway, America. This is where I started to say Dave might be woke right. So this is the first woke right test, Dave.
All right.
All right. Fair warning. So I hear, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's some America First type stuff, right? But on the other side, you're like, but the state and America and the bureaucracy. So I'm like, how can one be as educated? Like you said, we both studied the Mises.org books, you know, ad nauseum, right? So we understand about the state, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm wondering, how can you understand the concept of the state, but at the same time have an America First stance? That's what's confusing for me.
Well, I mean, because look, like the worst probably like political philosophy that's gotten its way into American statism has been this policeman of the world mentality, and the idea that we somehow, as Woodrow Wilson said, that we're here to spread democracy around the world, and the idea that any government could take on that role, which is, I mean, if stated honestly, is we want to be the world empire, because, you know, of course, obviously that level of power always corrupts, and it was probably never even had good intentions in the beginning, but certainly American foreign policy is not about democracy promotion. Even the people who screamed the loudest that it was, and will overthrow democratically elected governments in a second if they're not, playing ball with us. So so the America First movement, I think, in many ways was a response to the adventurism of the war on terrorism over the last 20 years, and is like going like, hey, why are we going and fighting all of these wars that aren't in America's interest, that have just hurt our country? And so I to me, that's preferable, certainly, to the like more interventionist streak of Republicans. And I'm sure there's lots of areas where, I mean, a lot of times with this, it's like, well, putting America first, what would be to me like abolishing the Federal Reserve and abolishing the FBI and the ATF and all that, that would be America first. That'd be real great, So like, I don't know. I think policies that are good for America are in line with libertarianism, and I think that the instincts of America First, that we ought to not be spending trillions of dollars fighting stupid wars that kill hundreds of thousands of innocent people, but
that's the American way. That's the American way.
Well, but that's
destroy,
America, right?
Divide, conquer, kill. I mean, that's what the country was founded upon.
Well, sure, that's true, but it's also like, as is true with most people, and I think as is true with the United States of America, people aren't just one thing. And there are people, like if you think in your own life, I guarantee you, it's true for me, and I'm sure it's true for you too, that there are some people in your life who just look at you like you're the greatest guy, like they just love that guy, whether your kids or your girl or your friends or whatever, they just love you. Yeah. And then there's somebody out there in the world somewhere who, if they brought up your name, they go, that guy is the biggest piece of shit. I fucking hate that guy. He did. And it might even be something you genuinely did wrong to someone, Right. So it's like, when you say America, it's like, yeah, look, America's always had this kind of like these extraordinary achievements of greatness and advancement, and then also this kind of bloody backhand that's like doing all types of fucked up, horrible shit.
Well, wait. Can I pause you right there? What's the greatness part?
Well, I do think that, look, just starting a country off of the document, the Declaration of Independence, and then adding the Bill of Rights to the Constitution ultimately later, whether that was, I'm not saying that was lived up to, but there's something powerful about the message of even starting with that. And I do think that that's part of the reason why we've been able to kind of like progress and develop, is because of that kind of foundational starting point. I think that America was, there's a reason why we're the most powerful country in the history of the world, and we've been the dominant empire of the world since at least World War II. And in my opinion, it is because America had at the time the most restrained, most free market country in the world. So there, like certainly economically, in terms of like medical advances and culture, there's just been like no force like the United States of America. It's like, truly magical shit that's happened. And I think that certainly, it's like there's always constantly this process, I feel like, of American culture kind of uniting the world, and then the American military going around and fucking that up completely and making everybody hate us.
Yeah.
But like when the Soviet Union fell, like people really did. They wanted blue jeans and rock and roll music. They wanted to live like a free life and be like, oh, okay, I'm not under like this constant totalitarianism. And America, however real it ever was, and it always was to some degree real, but not completely, but America did become a symbol of freedom for a lot of people around the world.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we have a big, corrupt, evil government that constantly comes in and messes all that up.
Right. Okay. So let's get to the American interest part, right? Because I like to be an objectivist, right? I like to look at things objectively, not subjectively. I want to say, look, here's how America was established. It was established off of kicking ass, okay? And my point is, like, why stop now? Like, there's this, we have Israel, which is our eyes, ears, and boot in a foreign land. They got some oil. I love some free, some free oil, some lower gas prices, drill, baby, drill. So I'm black, so I know these motherfuckers over there like my ass any motherfucking way. They enslave black people in these countries, right? So if Donald Trump or Joe Biden want to put their foot in some Palestinian ass, I'm like, who am I to stop them? You know what I'm saying? And it's weird to me because if you're pro-America, like, these people don't like America. They don't like you. They don't like Americans. So it's just like, why should we stop America or Israel from kicking their ass?
Well, I mean, because look, even if if you get past the fact that there's like just a ton of, women and children who are being slaughtered in all of these, wars, I think that it has greatly degraded this country that we've fought so many disastrous wars over the last 25 years. And it's cost the country trillions and trillions of dollars. I believe it's $7 trillion total for all of the wars, something in that ballpark.
God damn.
It's an enormous cost to the American taxpayer has to carry these wars on their back one way or the other. Now, of course, as you know, I mean, like not everybody might understand this stuff, but you do. But that even if they're not taxing the people directly for these wars, then they're printing the money to do it, and you're losing purchasing power. And so the American working people are paying for this shit one way or the other. They're carrying that burden on their back. And why is it exactly? I mean, look, Jeffrey Sachs, he's getting everyone pissed off at him right now because he said on Tucker Carlson's show that that we've outsourced our foreign policy to Israel. And I mean, it's pissing a lot of people off, but the bottom line, I mean, listen, you could listen to Ben Shapiro just the other day talking about Bashar al-Assad being overthrown, which has been an American operation there going back to 2011 to arm the anti-Assad rebels and create that civil war in the first place. And he's bragging. Why is it? Why is it that this is such a great thing that Al-Qaeda is now in control of Syria? And it's a great thing because you see it broke up the Shiite crescent. And so now Iran is going to have a tougher time getting weapons through Syria into Lebanon where they can deliver them to Hezbollah. And you're just like, oh yeah, that sounds like a real win for the middle part of North America, right? That's definitely about us, right? I mean, look, man, you could go back again, there's Benjamin Netanyahu wrote a book about this back in the 90s, but you can read if you want to understand the American neoconservative perspective of it, read a Clean Break, a new strategy for securing the realm. And it was the piece by David Wormser and Richard Pearl, and they wrote it to Benjamin Netanyahu, and it laid out the plan there. And the whole game was that the world had been insisting on a two-state solution for Israel and Palestine for so long, and Israel had agreed to it. and they had started this Oslo process. But the plan was to get away from the Oslo process, because the Oslo process said they had to start giving back territory to the Palestinians. And so the plan was, instead of doing that, instead of doing these land swaps, let's just remake the Middle East and overthrow all of Israel's enemies. And then you won't have to make this land deal, because there won't be all this pressure on you guys to make the fucking deal. And so Americans, look, man, to fight these wars that maybe are, I don't even think it's, the scheme is correct. Like, I don't think that would work. I don't think it would help Israel. I think this is insane, all of this. But by the way, four-star General Wesley Clark just confirmed recently, the other day, that he saw these plans in the 90s, to the famous quote that he talked about of toppling 7 governments in 5 years.
Somalia, Sudan,
yeah,
Egypt, Syria,
Libya, Syria,
Iran,
and Iran. Yeah. And he said the other day that 2001 wasn't actually the first time he saw it, that he saw it back from Paul Wolfowitz in the early 90s.
Oh, early 90s.
In the early 90s.
Wow.
So way before 9/11, they just used all that as an excuse, to get all these wars.
Right.
But so from the American perspective, even if this plan that would, let's say there's some abstract reasoning that you could say, well, this plan, if it worked, would have helped Israel, and Israel would have been good for the United States of America, or something like that. The fact is that we took, like, our boys died by the thousands in the war in Iraq and in the war in Afghanistan. We spent trillions of dollars doing that between those wars, and then, like, the dirty wars, in Libya, in Syria, in Somalia, in Yemen, where we backed the Saudis. All these wars, I mean, it's just trillions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of innocent people dying, our boys dying in the thousands, blowing their brains out by the tens of thousands when they get home. Who knows the number of how many of them are fucking just scarred for life and fucked up, not being taken care of, all that shit. And so, like, the costs are very real for this country. And so even if you don't, like, really care, you're like, why the fuck should I care that Donald Trump's kicking someone's ass over there or something like that? It's like, the more you get involved in this part of the world, the more conflicts there's going to be, the more wars you're going to end up being on the hook for. And they have, like, it's not a coincidence that we fought all these wars in the last 25 years. Every single one of them was a disaster. And the country has, like, had such a rough time during that same period. It's not a coincidence,
Yeah, I mean, the only part I got is the money laundering. The support of the military-industrial complex and everybody wanting to make money. Halliburton, Raytheon, and all these guys, right? Make sure y'all go out and get those stocks.
Yeah, and then it's like the dynamic that there always is, right? So this is always what happens with the nature of the state, is that then they find intellectuals to justify a position where the state takes more power. So they find this guy, have you seen this guy Keynes? This guy Keynes says we got to raise spending and we got to forget, you know what I mean? It's like, no, you're just finding a guy who's giving you the answer you want. And so then, and the same thing happens with the warfare machine. I mean, you got these weapons companies fund think tanks that argue for more wars. You know what I mean? Like, it's such a racket, But then also a lot of those intellectuals end up becoming true believers, and they really believe in this shit. And some of them really do.
Maybe I studied too much history, right? I went out, watched the Gladiator movie, that's good historical research, right? But we have, Alexander the Gay. You got, all these different stories of expansions, Genghis Khan, and expansionism, right? So when I think about United States of America, first of all, I look at it as a peripheral nation of Western civilization. I don't view it as some separate nation. It's just expansionism, right? And Israel, as I know was part of this Western civilization expansion. When you go look at the British Mandate, the report from the British, right? When you read the report, there's no way you could read that report and say that they were working towards a two-state solution. And that was in the 40s and 50s.
Well, if you're talking about the Balfour Declaration, which was even way earlier, which was in I think 1917, I want to say. Mm-hmm. But there was, like, a line in there that was like, with respect to the rights of the local people or something like that, But there's, I think there's no question that to create a Jewish state on a land where a bunch of Arabs already lived was going to involve quite a bit of force in order to pull that off.
Yeah. Well, the document I was looking at was it's a British mandate report, and the British basically.
Oh, okay. So this is post World War II when the British are running. Okay.
After they had already conquered the Ottoman Empire, they're moving in, and when you read the report, you see investments coming from U.S. interests and British interests, and they're investing in the Israeli state. And it even includes some of the reports from some of the Arab leaders who are saying things like, you know, we didn't agree upon this and we didn't agree upon that. And the British were like, man, we don't give a shit. So I feel like from the establishment of the place, it was clear that there was not going to be a two-state solution, right? It was clear from when the British, French, and United States had the secret treaty to divide up the Ottoman Empire behind the back of the Russians, right? So the plans, when I'm looking at today and I see people complaining about today, that's why I just classify them as woke right, because I'm like, yo, these plans been in the works since they granddaddy daddy. You know what I'm saying? So it's just like, where do we go from here? You know, like, at what point do we acknowledge what I call the world liberal order and stop separating these things into Britain, United States, and Israel and just start saying this is one world liberal order. They got some plans, and where do we fit into it?
Well, you know, Charles Krauthammer, who I believe was the one who coined the term the unipolar moment. Which, you know, there's all these terms, like what you call it, people call it the New World Order or the liberal world order or the, you know, the post-war consensus or hegemony or what, you know, like there's all these different terms, but they all really just mean American empire. And they all just mean kind of the dominance of what is now, like, I understand your point about the connection from European powers to American powers, but the central point is now in DC, you know, like that's been true since the end of World War II.
I don't agree with that.
No, where do you think it is?
It ain't in DC.
I mean, I should say,
you know, the way I divide it up is the world liberal order operates with the economic power residing in London, the military power residing in DC, and the spiritual power residing in Israel. And this is how it functions. But
yeah, no, I mean, I get your point. I guess I just mean that, like, the guns are coming from DC.
Yes, correct.
And that's where,
yes,
where the guns are coming from is always kind of like the center of power in some fundamental way.
In a very fundamental way.
So, but okay, the true, but even Charles Krauthammer himself, who is like arch neocon, he called it the unipolar moment. Because I think even there was an understanding that, like, look, right after the fall of the Soviet Union, America was now the superpower of the world. And this was a moment unlike any other. There had never really been a singular superpower with the ability to destroy the entire world many times over and the ability to invade anywhere they wanted to, and just overwhelming, you know, dominance that we had on the global stage. And that is already, we're going through a huge realignment. There's, you know, over the years, the rise of China, the rise of Russia. Again, I'm not one of these people. I'm not at all saying either of them are a threat to take over the world or anything like that, because they're not. But they're not in like third world status. You know what I mean? These are countries who have like economically progressed quite a bit from the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union. And really during this war in Ukraine, you've seen like there being like a closer relationship between Russia and China, India falling in line with them, Iran falling in line with them. Like there is kind of this realignment going on. And I just think that, you know, from my perspective, it's not written in stone that like a very positive change can't happen, and that this whole thing is just inevitable. And so I don't think like pointing out the machine or pointing out the corruption makes you woke. I think it's like the characteristic to me, at least, of wokeism that I think most of us have been objecting to. And again, it's like, you know, like I'm when I say the term wokeism, I'm not talking about like the original use that it may have had in the Black community, or even like the intellectual tradition of the postmodernists or the critical theorists or something like that.
Yeah.
I'm saying like when regular people say the word, what they mean by that word at this point.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
otherwise it's just this, it's like linguistics are tricky like this. Like you have to fight for linguistic territory sometimes. You know, you have to sit down and be like, no, we're not doing that. We're not giving up the word woman. No, you can't have that. You know what I mean? Like that means something. But then there's also other times where you have to admit that, like, if there's a word and what it evokes in 90% of people's head is not what I mean by the word, then I got to choose a different word because I'm not communicating effectively now, you know?
Yeah.
And so I don't think what people are thinking about when they're talking about people who are woke, they're talking about being hysterical, irrational, making accusations of bigotry, trying to silence you, not trying to meet you with an argument, but trying to drown you out, get you deplatformed, get you banned, get you fired, things like that. That's what the average person thinks of with wokeness. I don't think that, like, pointing out that, like, hey, there's a machine here, a big machine that is, by the way, rigging the system against you in favor of powerful people, means that you're woke if you're following that up with like a tight argument about exactly how this machine is doing that. And so I just think that the problem is that if you know, like I've had somebody was saying to me, like, I remember I was in a debate about Israel, and they go like, they were like, so let me ask you, Dave, you think the Palestinian people are oppressed by the Israelis? And I was like, yes, they are. And he goes, oh, so you're like into critical theory now? You see the whole world as oppressor and oppressed? And I was like, well, there's a difference between seeing the entire world as oppressor versus oppressed, which is what the critical theorists insist on doing, and seeing every relationship, therefore your family, your business, your friends, everything has to fall into this like oppressor versus oppressed. Like, well, that's stupid, but that doesn't mean nobody is ever oppressed. You know what I mean? Like that's like, and just because but so I just think that, no, I don't find it particularly useful to call any of that stuff woke. I think it's like, if you're trying to have an argument, and you have an argument, even if it's a flawed one, I already don't even put you in that category. I'm reserving this for people who are trying to shut discussion down, which is what most people think of when they think of that term.
All right, we're gonna have to send some course correct here. I got to put on a 10-4 koof. You see, the word woke was created by the Black community to describe the nefarious actions of the white man. Now we fast forward into the 21st century, and the white man want to tell everybody else how to use the word woke. No, we not gonna allow that. See, the Black man gonna tell the white man when and how to use the word woke. So that's what the problem I got is when I go online, people try to tell me I'm trying to change the definition of woke. And I'm like, no, first of all, it was the blue crackers that contorted the word woke. Then it was the red crackers that contorted the word woke. So if I want to use the word woke, which came from my community, I'm going to use the word woke how I see fit from my community and contort it how I see fit. Now, on a serious note.
No, all right, fine. You make a good point. I'll call it the W word for now on.
No, but you make a good point, right? I like your definition because that's how people use it now, right? I have a problem that when I go online and I use the word and people tell me, oh, I can't change the definition of the word. And I'm like, the definition done changed 30 times already. How you going to put a foot? You can't put brakes on it now.
That's a good point. But it is a very, even as you said it, it's like it started off in like the Black community. Yeah. And then it got hijacked by a bunch of white and Jewish liberals. And now Jewish conservatives are fighting over it. It is the most American track ever. Like that's how things are supposed to go. That's the natural order of America. And then everybody's like, and then when someone comes along and they're like, Elvis stole all this guy's like stuff. Like the whole general public's like, hey, I think that guy stole Elvis's stuff. Look, he's doing it just like him. You're a fucking thief.
So that's my only issue. You can't tell Hotep Jesus when to change the definition because I'm like, y'all done fucked the word up already. Now let's go back to. No, go ahead.
But there is something to be said for the fact that like what I'm more than just who is woke or who isn't woke. Like my point about this is trying to make a comment on the ideas that some people have and then the way that they contradict their principles or stated principles during other events. The truth is that if I were like James, for example, and he doesn't like me very much, and that's fine, but like nothing against the guy, but I would just say that if you get the level of response that he's getting from this, and I know he was kind of mentioning like the trolls being a dick to him. I don't think people should be so dicks on social media, but that's the way it is, and that's the way it is for all of us. But there's like, if you're getting this much pushback and you have to do this much explaining about what, you know what I mean? Like if I'm like, hey, I have this new pop political term that I'm going to call this segment of the right wing, and this requires you to read like a 3-page, essay on exactly how and everybody's disagreeing with you and going, this doesn't work, this doesn't describe, then like, come on, it's not a useful term at that point. Like this isn't something that even like people have. So at least I would argue in my favor of like the people I'm calling woke, right? At least there is like a coherent argument that I could make in a few sentences, and you'd go, okay, I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying, that like they're calling for safe spaces on college campuses and now they're calling for safe spaces there. They're calling for deplatforming and now they're deplatforming. Okay, they're calling you a bigot when you raise a fair point that's not actually like bigoted. Okay, they're so it's like at least there's just like a coherent, you understand what I mean when I say it. But
I also get pushback. I use the term woke right, then a whole bunch of woke rights pop up and they're like, there's no such thing as a woke right. And I'm like, that in itself is woke. Because if there's a woke left, it's gonna be a woke right. They feel like because they're right wingers, allegedly, because they're just liberals in disguise to me, but they feel like because they're right wingers, they're impervious of being woke. Meanwhile, you got accounts out there that are going, oh my God, Miss France is black. And I'm like, are we serious right now? This is the greatest problem we could find, is what's going on with the Miss America pageant. Meanwhile, go ahead.
Even that, I just think that like, okay, so the people who are more like on the culture war front, or the people like you're saying who are freaking out about, say, the latest, whatever, white movie was remade as a black movie, or a trans
Little Mermaid
person was
or some
dancing
shit
at the Olympics or whatever, even those people, I just think a better term for them rather than woke is reactionary. Because that's what they are. They're reactionaries, and they're the people who are fighting the latest, extension of the new thing that they don't like, and going, I want to return back to the beginning before we had this new thing. And there's always a group like that. And it's typically speaking, I think the real definition of a reactionary is a conservative who means it. It's not that far off. Like, it's like the conservatives state all these goals. A reactionary actually wants to see those goals implemented.
Right.
And I think it's just a better description of that.
But the
branch
issue
of the right wing.
The issue is that's not a branch of the right wing. That is the right wing. If you were to describe conservatives right now, or what they call conservatives or right wing, the entire thing from top to bottom is a reaction to the left.
Yes.
They don't have a platform. What did they argue about this year? They let the left dictate the platform. We're going to argue about abortion.
Whatever the last thing, whatever the last incremental victory that the left had, it's like, we sure are mad about that, while accepting all of the previous victories as just part of America, like part of just that's who we are now. So you can't just say that one fringe part of this entire group is reactionary, is called a reactionary. No, this is the woke right, and the entire right wing is reactionary because they don't have plans. They don't have a platform. They don't have principles. Yeah, I mean, look, that certainly describes some people in the right wing, but I think that not having a plan. Well, yeah, well, I think you're kind of right about that. But then again, you get to a point where, okay, so then the entire right wing is woke or something like that. Again, in which case, maybe you're right about that. But then it's almost not a super useful term if it applies to everybody. But
it just don't apply to the Hoteps.
Not to the Hoteps. There you go. Well, I think that well, I think by your definition, I don't think it would apply to like the Ron Paul libertarians either, because we have something kind of a bit different than just caring about like the last little thing that whatever progressive victory at your local school board.
Y'all are the last allies we got left.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's and look, I mean, it is, from my perspective at least, that is the thing that I always kind of want to get back to, that like statism really is the great evil of our time, and that is what causes so many other problems. And it's not that everything would be perfect without giant powerful governments, but it is that they just make all problems so much worse.
But that's what I don't get now, right? And I want to really understand you on this, right? Because you can't be pro-America and anti-Israel. You just can't do that, right? For the specific reason, for the specific reason.
Are you getting a job at Daily Wire? Where is this coming from?
Oh shit! Hey Ben, call me up. Y'all heard it. Y'all heard it, Ben. Ben on material. You bought Tim Pool. Listen,
of course you can.
But
what does that mean?
I'm using your argument though, because your argument is the issue is the state. So if you love America, that means you love the state.
Well, I would say that there are, what any of us love about America has nothing to do with the state, and this is the classic error that Frederick Bastiat wrote about, the equating of society with the state and the state with society. And so, no, I think there's completely different things.
How?
Like how I feel about the town I live in and my neighbors and my daughter's school and my friends and my career is not how I feel about Joe Biden. And Joe Biden is not like some encapsulation of me or the country or what's great about all of us. So I think that I think if you love I think the only consistent position is that if you love the country, you would hate the criminals in DC who are looting the whole thing.
So, okay. So when you say the country, you're talking about the society.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. I think that's what goes into a nation or a country, whereas like the government is something entirely different. The government is the monopoly on the initiation of violence, the monopoly on laws and courts, and the monopoly on taxing power. And like that in itself, I think, is, destructive toward prosperity and civilization. But again, it's not, to me, like the case I made before about how disastrous these wars have been. Well, at the very least, I mean, like, even if people were outraged about like Jeffrey Sachs' comments that we've outsourced our foreign policy to Israel, and maybe you argue he's overstating that, and that's not true. You'd have to at least admit Benjamin Netanyahu did come to the United States Congress and testify in 2002 that we should overthrow Saddam Hussein. And as a regional expert, he testified that would bring stability and democracy to the region, and it would be worth it and great. And then he also, in the same testimony, advocated that we overthrow Gaddafi in Libya and that we overthrow the mullahs in Iran. And at the very least, you say that guy supported all of these wars that has hurt our country. And so, no, I don't think having that guy having a close relationship with American power is good in any way. I think it's very easy to be a critic of Israel because you think their relationship has a bad influence that hurts our country.
So my issue is that flag behind you.
Flag?
Right? Yeah, and then LeBron James don't want to stand for the Star Spangled Banner, and everybody's like, "Oh my God, LeBron James won't stand for the Star." And I'm like, "All right, so either y'all love this state or y'all love the people, because the Star Spangled Banner is about letting off them things, okay? It's about war. It's about letting them things off. The fireworks in the sky on 4th of July is about letting them things off, okay? So a country who's got everything pointed towards war, now everybody's saying, we don't want no war. And I'm like, so do you love the people or do you love the state? Because then you get up and you sing the ritual, the hypnotic ritual of the Star Spangled Banner. Then you get up there and you put the flag up there and you love the flag. But I'm like, these are symbols of the state and not of the people. Because I'm pretty sure the people had a different flag. I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but I know you probably are. But there was a different flag that represented the people as opposed to the one that was created for the United States of America, right? And
yeah, I get your point. Yeah.
Right.
Listen, I think a fan of the show who's like a wood artist made me this sign, and I thought the sign was cool, but I don't.
Well, I'm not attacking your sign. No, I'm not attacking your sign. No, what I'm saying
I'll tell
is
him you said that. You
no.
trashed my sign. Hotep Jesus hates your sign.
No, I ain't do that. I was just
worked
saying.
really hard on it, but whatever.
That shit fire. That shit fire. I love that shit. I'm not trashing
no, but
this
I do
artwork.
get your point. Well, look, there's always been this weird kind of contradiction in American conservative thought, where for many years they were kind of like and I mean this kind of pre-Donald Trump, more of the George W. Bush and like your grandpa's Republican Party was very like, we believe in liberty and the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, and we love the FBI and the CIA and the military. And you're kind of like, well, that is a little. I mean, for years the conservative position was that the biggest fear ever is that the government's going to round up the guns, but we love cops.
Right.
And you'll always be like, wait, so what do you
That's
you realize
right
that, like,
to me.
Well, I mean, you realize that if, the Democrats in Congress write this bill, like, who do you think's going to come round up your guns from you? It's not going to be Maxine Waters coming and, shaking you down for your gun. It's going to be some barrel-chested cop with 3 of his buddies next to him,
Right.
But anyway, so there's always been like deep contradictions in American popular conservatism. And I do think in some ways they've gotten a lot better on that. I think Donald Trump being at war with the deep state really turned a lot of Trump supporters against 3-letter agencies, which has been an interesting development. But I certainly agree with you that those contradictions are out there. But contradictions, again, I don't think are necessarily what is a real separating marker of political ideologies. I think it's more something that they pretty much all have in common.
And then what do? We got an omnibus bill in Congress. Everybody complained about the omnibus bill, but what was y'all doing last 2 years? Y'all put the motherfuckers in office, didn't you? So I'm thinking to myself, if you believe in the people, how come the people aren't represented in Congress? Because this is a republic. This is a republic. So this is why I'm saying there's too many contradictions for me to believe that the people believe what you believe. Because I know they don't believe what you believe. You're an educated brother, right? But it's contradictory to where money is running Congress. We live under a straight up plutocracy. So you put all these rich folks in office, then you complain when they put an omnibus bill in there and they get themselves. So I'm like, there's a contradiction here. Do you love the people? Or do you love the state? Because we keep participating. We keep going to the ballot. Yeah. We keep voting. And we keep that's pushing the same system.
And to some degree, I think that in some sense, government's always governed by the will of the people. And it's not the consent of the people, but it's the tolerance of the people. Like if the people are really unanimous and just simply won't tolerate something, and they really mean it, the government really can't get away with doing it. There's always got to be some tacit level of allowing them to, because there's just way more of us than there are of them. And so you're absolutely right. And look, it's insane to me, that anyone on either side votes for like these Congress men and women who have been in there for 40 years and are just like the most corrupt people. I mean, it's like you got these districts where you're voting in people who are like, they've been making a salary of like $200,000 for the last 30 years in Congress, and they're worth like $300 million. And you're like, you keep voting for these people? Like, you'll show up and vote for this guy again. You don't even, no matter what they say, or maybe they shook your hand once or something, but like, you don't just look at that and go, oh, this person's so goddamn corrupt in it. But at the same time, the system is obviously like not a true representative republic or democracy in any real meaningful sense. Like you said there yourself, the whole thing is kind of bought and paid for and rigged. So, to me, the thing that I'm like really tremendously optimistic about is that I think, because it's almost been like a little bit of a slow build, I think people in some ways aren't really appreciating how like revolutionary the moment we're living in is in terms of information and in terms of like how, you know, the fact that the corporate media apparatus, the state's, you know, propaganda apparatus has been fractured and just completely destroyed. And the whole center of where people are consuming information now is shows on the internet. And we've, now that, you know, so much of the control of people that authoritarian states have always relied on is like controlling the narrative, controlling the propaganda, and I think they've really lost an ability to do that. I think there's a lot of potential for people to wake up.
I think it was reorganized. I think the legacy media was destroyed, but it was reorganized under control opposition of influential or influences. The influences are now control op.
There's no question there's some truth to that. And you do see, right, like, I'm sure almost everyone could tell, like, you could just feel when certain people are being, like, pushed by the algorithm. And you're like, oh, they're making a star out of this person. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're showing me. Like, I do not want to see this videos, but YouTube keeps telling me, we know you really want to see this video. And you're like, no, I don't. Stop. What are you doing?
Right.
But, like, so there's definitely an element of that. So, yes, as soon as this became apparent that they were losing control of the narrative with the corporate media outlets, they immediately frantically started trying to get control of the internet, and they were somewhat successful in that. Obviously, there were huge deplatforming and censorship campaigns.
Yes.
And there certainly have been people who are pushed by the algorithm, but still, so it's not black and white, but it is some type of shade of gray, where it is still drastically more decentralized and drastically lower barriers of entry than the traditional corporate media apparatus.
Absolutely.
Where, quite simply, me and you, just this conversation never happens. Like,
Facts.
There's just no corporation that partners with a building where you get in an elevator and go up to the 50th floor and there's 50 people in suits and ties there, and they go lights, camera, action. And this conversation does not happen in that environment. You know, it can only happen in this internet world, which is like, it almost reminds me of, you know, like if you read about like when governments were established, like pre-industrial revolution, and it's never the way you think about it like today, where you're like, oh, there's a government and it controls this territory of land. It's always like, okay, they're trying to start a government, they have this province and this province, but really they can't control what the fuck's going on up here, and really, you know, and there's just so much area and they only have so many men that they can't really patrol everywhere and truly claim it's under their control. And I kind of feel like the internet's like that. It's a very vast, wild, wild west.
Absolutely.
Where they're trying their best, but then there are all types of people who slip through the cracks, who like just aren't supposed to be there. You know, if they had their way, they'd be like, this guy's not supposed to be allowed to have a show. But they're really having trouble. And I do think that there has been a very interesting cultural shift over the last couple of years, where it does feel like the woke left has receded a little bit, and a slight environment of less cancellation and stuff like that is happening.
Yeah, there's a shift to the hard right. I call it the Trump years will be the fourth Reich. We'll talk about that another time, but we're shifting to a very hard right stance, and that's why I wanted to warn you with your anti-Israel take. I don't want you to be calling a Jew coon in the next few years. You know what I'm saying? I just want to make sure we put that out there, because you could end up on the wrong side of history. I just wanted to find some clarification first on this whole America thing. I'm starting to understand your stance, the separation of society, et cetera, et cetera. But for me, woke right is when somebody comes out and they spend a lot of time talking about Israel, not enough time talking about United States' hand, not only in the creation of Israel, but every other thing they did to fuck the U.S. people, right? Like when people come out and they go, oh, USS Liberty, and I'm like, wait until you find out about the true story of Pearl Harbor. And then people freak out and go, I'm like, this is the same reaction y'all had when people talked about the USS Liberty 20, 30 years ago. You freaked out. And when I tell you, oh, maybe Pearl Harbor was an inside job, you're not allowed to say that, but you're allowed to talk about USS Liberty.
Or at least, at the very least, if not an inside job, deliberately provoked. you know, and like with like intentionally like pushing the Japanese to feel like they had to do it because they wanted an excuse to get into the war. And so, listen, I think you're certainly right about that. I mean, there's a lot of different important topics that are worth talking about.
So,
and I think that,
but that's my point, right? Like when we spend too much time talking about Israel and not enough time, like when we talk about USS Liberty, Uncle Hotep tweeted the other day, he said, I don't see enough people talking about LBJ's hand in that for me. It's not enough LBJ criticism for me because LBJ said, yo, you ain't going to talk about our favorite allies. But my thing is, show me a time where the United States hasn't been a corrupt and destructive government towards the USS people, whether it's in Israel or any nation. So I think these names like Israel, whatnot, are arbitrary because this has been the same plan that's been established by the Freemasons since they created this country.
Well, okay. So first of all, more hatred of LBJ is always a good thing. So no matter what, there's always more awful things you can say about that guy, who's truly one of the worst presidents in the history of the United States of America. And he's up there for sure. But so look, I mean, I think that the point is that yes, it is true that all of the U.S. history has had violence and periods of atrocities and horrible things, but that also you can say that there are things that are better and things that are worse. And so it is the growth of the post-World War II military-industrial complex as we know it today. And it's not that there was to no degree of a military-industrial complex before then. There's always, with every government, there's always some level of corruption. And you could argue certainly that America was an expansionist force from the very beginning. That, you know, so I'm not denying any of that. However, like to truly transform after the World Wars into like to some degree a limited constitutional republic to some degree.
I got to cut you off right there, right? Just to give you a good example, right?
Sure.
You take a child, right? Got two children. One of them you let get sunlight, you let them socialize, you introduce them to books, et cetera, right? Another one you like, let's hold this motherfucker back before we introduce him to any motherfucking thing. Then he grows up and he's got a learning disability, okay?
I'm running this experiment right now.
Are you?
Keep going.
Nice. Poor child.
This is what me and my wife decided to do. This is a great. I'll tell you. I'll let you know how it works out.
Let me know how a little retarded motherfucker turn out. To me, America is that autistic child that people are being like, oh, look how good it is. I'm like, no, this motherfucker's growth has been stunted from the motherfucking beginning. Whether it was the DuPont family or the Gates Foundation, whether it was the great inventions of Nikola Tesla that was stepped on by the power companies. So you showing me a child that's been stepped on and going, look how beautiful he turned out. I'm like, no, the motherfucker got Down syndrome and autism. You're stuck him with all these vaccines. Well, and you're telling me he's cute. No, that motherfucker Oz got Down syndrome.
Well, the thing is that America, right, has always been, it is all of those things, but then it's also like pretty amazing things. And so, and because America became so rich, it was able to do so many evil things and get away with it. And so there's all of these things are factors. I mean, it's like, look, the truth is that the Industrial Revolution, let's say, in this country, and this was not the only country to industrialize,
right?
But like the rapid rate of economic growth and the level of increase in the standard of living for regular people that happened in this country, even with all of those awful things, like all of that you said is true. Mm-hmm. And like if you want to like go down DuPont family rabbit holes, you're going to find evil shit. And
anti-free market, by the way.
Oh, yes. No,
okay.
And look, I mean, this is ultimately like the story of America. And there's a really, really great book that I highly recommend. Like if you're a reader and you're into like American history, The Progressive Era by Murray Rothbard, which is really just like phenomenal. But the whole thing was basically that under like, you know, the kind of American order from the end of the Civil War until say like 1910 was we were a country with certainly was not like a libertarian country, but we were, relatively speaking, if you're talking about like laissez-faire free markets, this was a country, I mean, try to imagine a country the size of the United States of America with no income tax, no central bank, no federal regulation, or almost no federal regulation.
Wait, time out. What period did the United States of America not have a central bank?
I'm saying post Civil War until 1913, there was no central bank.
That's not true.
Yeah, it is.
No, it's not.
Yeah, go look it up.
I wrote a book on it. I did all the research. America's had 5 central banks.
Yes. But what year did the central bank?
So
the Federal Reserve came in 1913.
Yeah. So you're talking about the one that was dissolved after the Civil War.
Yes.
Okay.
And then the Federal Reserve was the next one.
Okay, but there was four. That was four total.
Previously, yes.
Okay.
But that period, 1865 to 1913, was a period with no
central bank.
It was one of the longest periods, I think the longest period in American history with no central bank.
That's correct.
So I'm saying in this time where you have no income tax, you have no central bank, you have very little government spending on the federal level.
Correct.
You have very little government intervention in the economy.
Yeah.
And this produced like this economy that just exploded unlike any other in world history.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm not saying now what happens here is that you have these titans of industry. This is why I was recommending the Rothbard book. You have these titans of industry, as they call them, all with like banking connections and stuff like that. So I'm not like trying to make it out like these were purely, just like, earned everything they had or whatever. But you had JP Morgan and JD Rockefeller and people like this. And they created these companies like Standard Oil and US Steel. And this, now they got filthy rich off of this, but it did like improve the standard of living for regular people. Because of Standard Oil, people like could have lamps and read at night and stuff like that. And because of steel, they ended up having like railways that came in and you could travel and stuff. But then essentially what ended up happening was all of these guys realized that the best way to really make profits wasn't to just outcompete everybody in the market, but it was to buy a local congressman and have him write some rules so that your opponent couldn't compete with you as easily. And then they just all got into the game of government, and the thing started growing in corruption and growing and growing and growing. So there's, it's, again, the legacy of America is always people who want to point to some good shit can probably find some good things to point to, and people who want to point to some horrific shit can. Yet this guy Joe Walsh asked me on Piers Morgan's show the other day, where he was like, is America a force for good or evil in the world? And I was just like, whole lot of both. I don't know what to say. I mean, like, if you were in Vietnam in 1968, probably seemed pretty evil to you around that point,
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I just go back to the stunted growth of a child, right? You're giving credit to this whole industrial period, and I'm like, it's America's growth has been stunted from the very beginning. A lot of times, the creation of the Federal Reserve was pushing us into the war, right? That was part of the reason
we get
for
in
creation.
World War I a few years later, yeah.
Yeah, right? So, that's when I look at it and I'm like, I don't know if America has lived up to its potential. Let's say that.
No, well, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that it has. So I don't necessarily disagree with that at all. And I think it's kind of like that's in this new world now where there are alternative voices who are able to be heard. Mm-hmm. I think like the idea is to kind of push for things that you think will make the country better. And that's not going to be, I don't think my like ideal scenario is coming true anytime. I don't think we're going to be an anarcho-capitalist, society anytime soon. But I do think if we could, if Trump could get in and say like negotiate an end to the war in Ukraine, which I think could pretty easily be negotiated to an end, that would be better than the status quo. And so there are, you know what I'm saying? Like I think we can kind of like have our ideals, have our criticisms of America, and still be like, I'd like to see improvement, and improvement is possible.
So this is where I fall into the realist versus idealist, right? Like, I'm a realist. So I hear y'all arguing about, Israel and all this shit. And then I just go, oh, these motherfuckers is woke because you guys are dealing in idealism. You're like, we can make America better. And I'm sitting up here like, man, this shit been in the plans since your granddaddy was your granddaddy's daddy. You know what I'm saying? Like, this shit has been in the plans. Adam Weishaupt set all this stuff up a long time ago. What makes you think you gonna stop the plans of the Bavarian Illuminati and the Freemasons that established this country? You know what I'm saying? It's kind of funny to me, right? You got the picture of George Washington, and he got his hand in it's like this. You know what I'm saying? In his pocket. Then you got the picture of Karl Marx, and he got his hand like this here. Then you got the dude from the Knights of the Golden Circle, who was kicking it with who's the dude that shot Lincoln? Booth?
Yes.
You got Booth, and then you got Jess James. All these cats going like this in their photo. So I'm like, unless Dave Smith going like this in his photo, I don't know if he got any say-so on what's going on here in the world liberal order. So to me, I go, all right, we all grifters here. I'm a grifter. We all getting our grift on. But I'm like, I feel like it's idealistic to say, hey, let's pull out of Israel. And I'm like, yeah, I know that's not going to happen, right?
Yeah, I mean, but I get your point. I think that there's more. I think that people have more power than I think maybe you do, and I think that like ideas are powerful and waking people up is powerful, and I do think that things like the Soviet Union falling, or things like the abolition of slavery, and again, I don't, not to get into technical arguments about to what degree slavery still exists, but like there's less chattel slavery in the Western world than there once was.
Yeah.
I think there's like drastic improvements that aren't necessarily part of the plan of the Illuminati or the most powerful people who are really pulling the strings on whatever level. I think that they have plans. I think they quite often get them implemented. I think quite often the plans fail. Quite often they blow up in their face. It doesn't work out exactly like they thought, because they're not gods. They're people. And that actually sometimes improvements, even ones that they were really against, can happen. So I think there's like, it's not that I would ever try to encourage you or any listener to not believe that there is this system that's rigged, and there are powerful people who pull the strings, and there are like these kind of like spells that they try to put you under, so you view things in a certain way so you can't wake up. But I would also just say that like that stuff, the way they propagandize people is kind of a white pill in a way. Like there's something kind of encouraging about that, because you're like, oh, so you guys, in your estimation, you have to control my mind in order to be able to do the shit that you do. And in that sense, I do think it's worthwhile to like try to de-propagandize people and point out where you're like, you see that they're fucking lying to you right now because they want you to believe some bullshit that's not true at all, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's a big part of what I try to do. I get your point. I mean, like, yeah, we all are grifting in some way, I suppose. And I think that there is almost like in 99% of conversations like this, there's almost like this thing that's treated like an a priori given, that is that like this conversation matters, and it matters that we're going to do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's not, like that people don't in this field obviously have an incentive to not examine that and go, does any of this really matter? But I do think, at least I'll say for myself personally, this shit is just like, it's like a calling for me. I don't know. This is just like my calling.
It absolutely is your
talk
calling
about this shit.
It absolutely is.
I almost can't not do it. It's like this is what I have to do, and I feel like there is something where even just in itself, the people that I've read and like learned from, who have like opened my eyes to things and been like, wow, I kind of get this now. I just really enjoy that. I like being able to see things, you know what I mean? Like for what they are. I like the truth for its own sake. And so I like to try to tell other people the truth as I see it. Cause I'm like, oh, I bet you'll think this is cool. Cause I thought this was really cool. Kinda like,
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. And so what is your white pill? Like what is your way of saying we can win, right? Like for me, mine is, fuck this shit, let this shit burn. We gonna build Hotepistan. You know what I'm saying? And we'll be allied with these nations and just, move accordingly, right? But what is your white pill to people? Like how do you see, realistically, how do you see making America better? Because I see these plans as being laid out, 1,000 years ago. They're gonna play out. There's nothing you could do about it. I think you're one of the best orators of this in this arena. Like, I can't really name too many people better, right? Like, it's the only people I could really listen to from the white dudes is, well, I guess it's just the two Jewish guys, you and Michael Malice.
There you go. Well, I appreciate that. I mean, look, I don't know. I think that, the game of predicting the future is always very tough because there are so many variables and you don't know the way that everything's going to shake out. But I think that as I said before, we're in a situation where the state's propaganda apparatus has been shattered. More people now have access to truth if they want to search it out. Like just information is much more available for people. And while this is happening, there does seem to be this, as a result of this, at least to some degree, partially, there does seem to be this tremendous realignment where the regime is just not able to sell propaganda in the way that they've historically been able to do it. It is much more difficult for them now. I don't know if you saw CNN got caught a couple days ago doing like a fake video.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
And it was like 48 hours before they had to admit it, before they even had to admit that. Because today you just can't, it's like the dynamics aren't what they used to be.
Yeah.
It's not just like, oh, nobody can really. Now you have social media that has just I don't even know what the number would be, but if CNN lies like that CNN show maybe had like a couple 100,000 people watching it, but the video of them lying on the internet is going to be viewed like hundreds of millions of times. Like it's just because it just goes super viral and so then now it's like people can actually call out the regime's bullshit and pressure them, and they have to admit it. And you kind of see how they've just lost control of this thing. And while that's happening, to some of the stuff you're talking about, I mean, the plan that's laid out is like spinning it off a cliff, like where the country is completely bankrupted, the currency has been just totally degraded, the culture has been collapsing for many decades right now by just like objective measures of how healthy a society is, how much they get married and reproduce and aren't on prescription medication or whatever, you know what I mean? However you want to judge it. And so there is this thing where I think we're kind of like, there's a lot of danger in a period like this, but also in a period of like this is kind of like when things can shift and something big can happen. And I don't think that I do think that there's been human progress in the past and there's no reason why it can't be in the future. I also don't think it's gonna take an element of elites as well. It's not just going to be like some popular, because nothing's ever just a popular uprising. There's always like elites who are somewhat involved in it. There's rich people behind the scenes and stuff like that who are really pulling strings. But and when I say rich, I mean like rich, not like, I mean people worth in the billions at least.
Correct.
And maybe that's not enough these days. You got to be worth like hundreds of billions. But even sometimes you could get those guys who are kind of like, all right, they view it in their best interest to do something that's a little bit good for the people so the people don't ultimately overthrow them. Because that is the common fear amongst all the elites, is that the people will figure out what's really going on and overthrow them. That's always from the first time anyone ever took over a society, that was always the big fear. It's like, you have to rule these people now, and and there's a lot more of them than there are of you. So you got to make sure that they fucking stay in line. And I just see,
Can I tell you how I view that?
A world of possibilities.
Can I tell you how I view that?
Sure.
I view that how I view anti-Semitism, right? Where the elites are usually 10 steps ahead. So they're going to give you the information. So somebody could do something stupid and they could pass legislation and take away your rights. So in one way you think like, oh, the people are being liberated with the information and that's the state losing power. But I'm like, nah, this is what they did with the Reichstag fire decree. This is what they did with the Patriot Report. They're going to give you enough rope to hang yourself. And that's
that's a concern for sure. And that's what people got to be really smart about that shit. And that was nothing else, but that was my biggest critique of the people who were going in there on January 6th. And, you know, I don't know exactly what percentage of those people were like feds or Fed informants or whatever and what weren't, but anybody who did just get swept up in it. And I'm sure there were just regular people who just were like, in the moment, fuck it, we're going to do, it's like, hey man, you do not ever want to do some shit like that. Like you're, you know, like that is what the ruling class would love more than anything else, is for you to give them the excuse. And so I do certainly think that you always have to try your best to be on guard about that. Like that's why I was, you know, people gave me shit for it, and I understand that he was encouraging people not to go in the building or whatever. But and I like him. He was very cool to me. But Alex Jones, I was like, what are you even doing down there, dude? Come on, you know this shit better than anybody, right? This has been the whole message you've been drilling home this whole time, is that they and I know people like, oh, that he's told them not to go in the building. It's like, yeah, but don't even be there, you know, like this is just, it's so easy for them. Even, come on, I mean, if you're, you know, at a Trump protest and you're protesting the certification of the ballot, you see how they're going to be able to frame you up for this if anything goes wrong. And that's not saying that I have the same, you know, opinion that CNN has. Or so I'm not saying like it was an insurrection and worse than 9/11. It's like, no, it was nothing. Ultimately, it was really nothing. But it's just I think the point that you were trying to make, like the kind of like, guys, let's have a little bit of wisdom here and recognize that you always could be vulnerable. And but look, that's true for any like protest movement or any dissident movement or anything like that. You're always going to be vulnerable for you know, provocateurs and
don't forget the third angle is the MK Ultra bot, right? If you don't actually do something, they'll stage it.
Yeah, well, they've definitely got some tricks up their sleeves, and they've done a whole lot of things. As you know, it's if you just started talking about what the CIA has done in declassified files, like what has been admitted to the public, not like there's no controversy over it. They admit that they've done this, and if you just read through it just in yourself, you'd sound to the average normie.
I don't know what you're talking about, Dave.
Kook in the world.
I don't know what you're talking about, Dave. You sound crazy right now, Dave.
Yeah, I mean, you'd be like, yo, this is insane. What are you talking about? And you're like, no, this is the shit they cop to, not the shit that we haven't figured out yet. This is what they admit they had to tell you about this time. And so, you know, there's no question there's all types of forces like that. But then there's also like, you know, there's all types of battles within the powers that be. And, you know, there's you kind of just never know exactly where these things are going to go. But there's no question that, like, you know, I think people like, and again, I think this is like kind of a fundamental libertarian insight. Well, I would argue the most fundamental libertarian insight is essentially that the state is a group of human beings, and that they should be judged morally by the same standards that we judge other human beings, that they don't get this kind of like extra moral, you know, quality to them because they are congressmen or friends. And so if a cop did something to you that wouldn't be justified if you just did it to another person, then he's the bad guy, you know, like it doesn't matter like, oh, well, he had a badge on, so therefore he's like in some different plane of what, you know, God believes is right and wrong for them to do. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And so when you recognize that, you recognize like, okay, well then what is the government? I mean, like, what would we call any other organization that did what the government did? If they taxed people at the threat of kidnapping them, and they started mass murder campaigns that they call wars, and you'd be like, oh, I know what you are. You're a gang. Like, okay, you're a criminal organization. Like that's, you know, and so you're talking about the biggest, baddest, most powerful criminal organization in the history of the world, and they will fucking kill babies by the hundreds of thousands for strategic reasons, whatever those might be, you know, whether it's more power or more money or some geopolitical, you know, chessboard move. If this country falls, we'll have more influence in this country, whatever. But anyone who was willing to do that type of shit to secure that type of power, yeah, what do you think they would do to you if you were a threat to that power?
I'm a Zionist, so I ain't got no problem with them.
You don't have to deal with these. So you don't have to deal with these problems as a proud Jewish Zionist as yourself.
Shalom, shalom to all my Akis out there. Got no problem.
But you know, so the point is that you don't want to ever like you want to be smart. Anybody who's advocating that you break the law, anybody who's advocating you do something violent, just treat that person like they're a fed, whether they are or not. Just treat them like that. Don't do anything stupid like that. But it's the way that we win is like a boiling frog, you know, type of thing to some degree. This is how the Soviet Union almost collapsed. Eventually, the people just didn't believe the propaganda anymore. They were just, this is all bullshit, and we know you're lying to us, and we know this doesn't work, and we know this system is corrupt, and everyone knew it. And there were so many of them, and there were real debates, like at the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union, whether or not they were going to forcefully put down these separatists who wanted to break away. And they were just overwhelming in numbers. And eventually the states hired guns were like, yeah, we're not going to just shoot on our own people. So
yeah,
that's it. And that was the end of it, you know? And not that everything was perfect after the Soviet Union collapsed, but it's better that it doesn't exist than it still did.
Yeah, yeah. So last conversation I want to have with you before we part ways. I'm a black man, you know, and I don't feel too American. You know, I don't think most black men or women feel too American. We don't feel welcome here, you know. And it has nothing to do with the history of the United States, although it does a little bit. I think just mostly because when it comes to the political apparatus, Democrats use us, Republicans want nothing to do with us, right? So we really have no place in this America thing. So that's why when I hear people say America first, to me, it's a white problem. Am I wrong in viewing it like that? But I mean, it's our problem because we're under white or European rule. So, you know, whatever affects y'all is going to affect us. But I feel like this is the white man's war. Am I wrong in saying that?
Well,
I could give you more evidence as to why I say that if you need it.
I mean, it depends on what exactly, like precisely what you mean by this stuff. And so, yeah, I mean, it is true that certainly, obviously, to your point in the history, that black people were not in any way incorporated into the American concept of citizenship or liberty in any sense, really, until at least the 1960s. And as soon as that was given to black people, like, I mean, as soon, like almost like the second that they were like, okay, we're going to end segregation and we're going to end this shit, then just a million policies were put in that just absolutely, like, you know, totally decimated black communities and black culture and black churches and black you know, and you know, and whatever, we could go through all of them, whether it's policies like the Great Society and the welfare state and the rise of gun control laws and the rise of drug laws and the rise, just all like one after the other was just a disaster. That being said, I don't know exactly, you know, like what and in what way, like what percentage of black people would agree with your take on that. I'm sure quite a bit. I think that there are certainly lots of black people who are very incorporated at this point into the United States of America. And so, and even to the highest levels of the war machine, there's been very, you know, like Colin Powell and Barack Obama. However, these are more or less the exceptions and not the rule. You know what I mean? Like, it's not as if like that's been the majority of the case. But I do think that, I guess I would say, you know, like I'm a libertarian, and I am not a politically correct libertarian. I don't believe in some like leftist kind of this almost like given that egalitarianism and multiculturalism are goods in and of themselves.
Right.
Like it's like
I
believe
think
in
that
liberty.
I think those things are detrimental to a society.
Well, and look, I understand your position. I believe.
No,
in
let me
liberty.
clarify my
I believe,
position.
but I'm just saying I believe that people wish to live amongst their own. That they have that's a natural right, and that if people have whatever views they have about other groups of people is also their right. It's their mind, and they're free to think what they want to think, and you ought to be allowed to say things in public about what I mean that you view. But regardless, I do think that at the end of your question, you kind of answered it there. What the situation is what it is right now. And as you said, Black people are living in this country. And so if there's a policy that's going to make it much worse, Black people are going to suffer the consequences. And you could argue certainly that because of the situation of large portions of the Black community in the United States of America, that they suffer worse on average with these problems. I mean, if you want to look at something like, the price inflation of the last few years, this is kills.
Well, my issue,
working class people.
My issue isn't with the state though, because I expect the state to do state things, right? Coming back to what you were saying about America before, you don't describe America as the state apparatus, you describe it as a society. And what I see is a society hostile to Black people. And this is a great quote from Sam Tripoli, who says, Black history is white future. Because when things were done against the Black community, everybody looked the other way, right? So when we're dealing with the red whites, I call them red whites. When we're dealing with the red whites, right? The red whites will say, you're an American. You're Black, you're an American. Stop calling yourself Black, you're an American. But where were they when Trayvon Martin got shot? Where were they when Tamir Rice got gunned down? They chose the opposite side because of skin color, right? They don't look at us as Americans until it benefits them, right? So when you say this American society, I go, this society is for white folks. So when I get this conception of America, but Black folks still got to pay taxes, we still got to fight in your wars, I'm like, there's a disconnect on what this American society is, especially built off of immigrant labor, et cetera, et cetera. There's a disconnect on what this American society is. So when we have these conversations, I'm thinking about it from the first person. As a Black man, I'm looking at people in alignment with the state with their actions. Black man get gunned down by the police. Oh, look the other way. And I'm like, oh, so you're in alignment with the state. You know what I'm saying? And as soon as Black people, and then the other thing, there was a big fuss this year. Black pilots. Oh my God, it's a Black pilot. He must have got there through DEI, right? This is what we were getting out of some of the woke right's finest, like Charlie Kirk, right? This is some of the woke right's finest. This is supposed to be, some of your greater voices. Now, the amount that it takes just to buy into a school to become a pilot. If a Black man's your pilot, he's probably one of the more trustworthy people to be there, because most niggas don't wake up going, I want to fly airplanes. They say, I want to shoot a basketball, or I want to rap, or I want to dance. This is what we think about. You see what I'm saying? And I'm speaking from personal experience. I wanted to be a rapper, okay? We don't wake up thinking we want to be a pilot. So a Black man's a pilot, and they go, oh, he's a DEI hire, which is hostility towards Black people. And all we get is hostility towards Black people. We get it from Democrats in the form of policies, and we get it from the red whites in the form of their behavior. If you look at social media right now, it's flooded with racist innuendos.
Sure,
right?
No question.
So real quick, just to finalize, this American society, if it does not include a coalition with Black folks, it can never be strong to topple the state.
Well, I mean, I agree with that. I mean, I think that whether it's kind of like in some similar sense, like, whether it's Israel and Palestine or whether it's white and black people in the United States of America, we are all in this thing together right now, whether we like it or not. And we do have a shared history, not to say that that means it's a fair history, but it goes back quite a while at this point. And there's almost like no removing that, like if you're telling the history of the Palestinians, you're talking about the history of the Jews too. And if you're talking about the history of black people in America, well, it's been hundreds of years for the vast majority of them of being here. And so there's almost no way to completely untangle that. I guess I would just say that I certainly think that there's no question that you're never gonna entirely escape the fact that people are tribal by nature, and the fact that being a minority in a country always to some degree is going to kind of put you up against that, where, you know what I'm saying? Like you're particularly in a democracy where majority rules. When you're a minority, you're by definition starting at a disadvantage. That being said, I guess I just see like, what is it, we're on this side of heaven, things are not going to be perfect, but we can try to see like how good can human beings be. And I think that the government at every single angle, and even there, when you're giving, your examples of like the black experience in America, it's always comes down to like what the government is also doing here. And they're just always constantly stoking these divisions, making things so much worse than they would otherwise be. And that's not to say that everything would be perfect, but my God, like, it's like first off, I mean, even that, right? It's like, it's because they do this DEI bullshit in the first place that then they give the excuse to these right wingers to say, well, now when I see any black guy anywhere, I can say, oh, you're just a DEI hire. And so, and, and I mean, just the state of like, there's also something where the state of, through direct government policies, and I believe intentionally, the government, and I don't mean intentionally at every single level of government, because I don't think that I don't think the lady at the welfare office who's telling like the mother of three that like, well, if you kick your man out of the house, I can give you $1,200 a month. But if you have a father in the house, I can't give you that. Like, I'm not saying she's in on some plan, but like at certain levels of government, they certainly were in on some plan. And the government has systematically destroyed the black family, destroyed the black community, destroyed black schools, destroyed black neighborhoods. And then, which I would really be interested if one day maybe we find out completely what exactly, level of federal intervention there were in things like the Diddy case and shit like that. But the push. Well, I'm just saying, like, the push of like gangster rap and thug culture was just totally intentionally glorified for many, many years by giant, very big companies, many times with government connections. And it was like just, I think, a disaster overall around for everyone. And I say this as someone like, I was a 90s kid and I grew up on hip hop music. I don't like hate gangster rap. I actually love a lot of it, but I do think that the impact of all of these things was, number one, a rise of a level of criminality in the black community that was really never present in the black community, even through the worst of Jim Crow. The black family was very intact. Black crime rates were much, much lower. And I don't think that's because Jim Crow was so successful and great necessarily, but I do think it's because all these other factors didn't exist. The schools weren't destroyed. The communities weren't destroyed. The family unit wasn't destroyed. The gangster life wasn't, promoted. But then the flip side to that is that it also, like, I think led to, it made it much easier for white people to be racist against blacks. Because when you're seeing the imagery of like thugs and broken, communities and broken homes and things like this, it becomes much easier to just in your mind kind of be like, yep, that's black people. They're like that. And so I don't know, like, to what degree, like I said, I believe in liberty. I'll listen to old speeches of like Malcolm X or something. And I'm not, obviously, I don't agree with Malcolm X. I'm not Muslim and I'm not a black nationalist, but goddamn, I love listening to speeches that guy gave because it's just like great, and it's really it's brilliant and it's interesting and it's controversial, and I get the points he was making. I also get the point that like integrationists were making, and I don't know to what level like racial harmony will ever be, perfect or anywhere close to perfect.
Right.
But I do think that when I look at this, I just go like, government intervention is just constantly making things worse. And then on top of that, of course, as kind of in your what was it? Didn't you do the thing where you trolled Starbucks?
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Yes.
Like things like that.
Reparations coffee. Yeah.
But all the thing that you were mocking and making fun of and all of that, it's just how goofy and ridiculous all of these weird things that are like divisive and don't even help. Like they don't even do anything to, I remember I was talking with Maj Touré, who I think you know Maj, right?
Of course.
I remember one time he was like, it was like I had him on my podcast. I think it was during the Black Lives Matter riots, and they were like tearing statues down. And he's like, dude, I have like 12 really good friends doing decades for like selling coke. And you're like, can I get one of my friends back? Like, that's really nice that you're like tearing this statue down and stuff. But like, there's just constantly like all of these really divisive things done that don't even help a black person, don't even do anything for like the black community. It's just kind of these like intentionally divisive things that are pushed by all of the most powerful institutions constantly, And so anyway, I just think things could be much better if we didn't have so much government intervention.
I totally agree, but it just comes back to, what you're saying before about American society. And I think what it is, I'm having a disconnect in understanding this concept, and maybe because of where I sit, and I see so much divisiveness, which a lot of it is pushed by state and state propaganda, like you said. But this American society, I'm like, which part? because
I agree.
None of it works together, and nobody's even trying to work together. Like, everybody's just like, when I log on today, who can I dunk on? And it's just like... Yeah. Did y'all say prayers to Jesus yet?
I get your point, certainly, about all of that. And part of it is because, we're not truly a nation. And I think it's possible that you could argue that America really was a nation for a period. Like, I think post World War II, in the 40s and 50s or something, you could really argue that like, even though there was like clearly, there was segregation in places in the country. And so there was kind of this, like, there was white America and black America. So there was always that distinction, but that was basically it. Like, if you look at the population in like 1955 or something like that, it's like, like around like 90% white, 9% black, 1% other. Like it was a white and black country. There wasn't really much else in America.
Yeah.
And everybody listened to the same radio and watched the same television and went to the same movies because there just wasn't that much of it. And that was, so there really was kind of one thing that at least kind of held people together. Like, this is our culture. Like, if there was a big fight or a big game, America was watching, and that all has changed now. We're totally decentralized culturally. People watch their own things now. I don't even know. It's a weird feeling to us. Like, I don't even know like who's famous or who's what or anything. Cause like, it's not like it's not like, oh, there's 3 networks and we're going to watch one of the things that are on these 3 networks. And so having a country, a nation,
it's just Joe Rogan. It's just Joe Rogan and Alex Jones right now. That's the only thing
that's pretty much. I think that's pretty much the only thing holding this thing together is Joe Rogan and Alex Jones. That's a precarious position to be in, America. But it is like you have 330 plus million people. You have a plethora of different racial and ethnic groups. You have multiple different cultures. I mean, the culture in San Francisco and the culture in Alabama are just like not the same at all. They are different nations,
Yeah.
And so I do think part of this now, again, to tie it back to libertarianism is like, well, like really probably what would be better off would be some radical form of decentralization where you could have much more, at least federalism, or where at least like states and counties and towns had more autonomy. And I think that this is particularly it's we, you know, Barack Obama had some line recently, it was during the campaign I think, where he was like, you know, nobody has ever tried to have such a large, such a multicultural, such a multiracial democracy. And like I saw a bunch of right wingers on Twitter who were like, yeah, I wonder why. I wonder why nobody else ever tried this. There's a lot of challenges that come along with it. And that's why I do think that, you know, even the amount of authoritarianism that it would take to like forcefully split this apart is going to be a disaster. What you want is just to have like, just don't force it. You know, just let people organically come together or separate, let people have their liberty, and you're going to get the best results possible.
Yeah. You know, I think when it comes to woke, in a way, I'm trying to force the way I view things on people, right? So to me, I'm a generalist. Most people are specialists. So you got your anti-Israel people, then you got your pro-Israel people, and then you got people like me that's like, oh, you see these things as separate? So when I see people looking at these things as separate, I'm like, you know, I view America, Britain, and Israel as part of, you know, just parts of a single machine, whereas people view them as separate parts operating independently. So when I see people viewing them not as parts of a single machine, to me, I'm like, nigga, what kind of woke BS is motherfuckers on? You know? Yeah,
well, look, I mean, I don't know if woke is the word I would use to describe that necessarily, but I do think that you're right, essentially, that there is, I mean, again, there's different power centers all over, and sometimes they're in competition with each other and one side loses and the other side wins. But generally speaking, I think you're essentially right that, yeah, this is a big machine that does move toward, you know, all together toward certain ends constantly. And that there is no question that there's people who get too wrapped up into any one issue. Right. And and then you're not going to have kind of like a good meta analysis of everything that's going on. Yeah. So I definitely think that's true. I do think though that the US relationship with Israel and the war that's going on there is of enormous importance. And the way this is playing out, because there is a tremendous grip that the pro-Israel people have on our foreign policy. And that's not, I'm not saying like it's not as clear cut, even to your point.
You're starting to sound anti-Semitic there, Dave.
Well, see, to your point though, I don't think the people who genuinely do like hate Jews, I don't think they get it right. And I don't think that they, you know, like I said earlier, like it's really not a comment on Jewish culture or Jewish people or even contributions that Jewish people have made towards society.
Right.
It's more and even to your point about it all being one thing, you kind of can't even separate it. It's all so mixed together. You know, like a lot of times the kind of like the more hard right wing, you know, like Groyper types will get kind of like in this like train of thought that it's like, well, it's the Jews who have the power and it's the Jews who run all of this shit.
Yeah.
The truth is that there certainly has been a disproportionate amount of Jews who have been very influential in American foreign policy and American banking policy and in those industries themselves. But there's also a ton of Americans, Christians, you know, like it's so integrated and intertwined that it is like this powerful class. And I don't think that seeing I think you always, and I mean this, like I said before, I'm not denying that there aren't groups and communities and families, but I think that all of this collectivism always makes you miss the mark a little bit. Okay. You're not really seeing it. It's like when you know, when right-wingers will say like the stuff about black crime statistics,
Yeah.
when they'll say, hey, there's, you know, black people are 13% of the population and commit 52% of the homicides or whatever, you know, forget even like if you quibble with the numbers, or like there's just other points too that you could make too, which, you know, one interesting one is that the exoneration rate is also about the same for blacks. Like they're like 13% of the population, but make up like 50% of the people we figured out that we wrongfully, you know, like put in jail too.
Okay.
So again, but even more fundamental than quibbling with any of the numbers, it's like that statement itself just isn't really true. The statement
Correct.
that 13% of the people are doing 50-something% of the crime, because it's not 13% of the people who are doing that.
Right.
It's a tiny little portion within that 13%. You know, like you take out, like, it's not black women who are committing violent crime. That's half of black people right there that are taken out. It's not black 60-year-olds. It's not black 2-year-olds. It's not black. And then amongst, like, you know, criminal aged males, the vast majority of them are not violent criminals. You know what I'm saying? So it's
Right.
like the 13% thing was just a construct in your mind because you're lumping black people together. But the black dude who's like a dentist who, you know what I mean, like lives in like, I don't know, wherever in Manhattan or something like that, is like, what, you're lumping him in with the guy, the gangbanger on the south side of Chicago, like as if he's somehow a part of that. And so there is this sloppiness whenever you think of people in groups where it's like, look, like if you want to make the argument that Jewish people like disproportionately are involved in different destructive industries, okay, that's true. They're also disproportionately involved in very productive industries that are very good for people. And so I do think that harping on any type of, like, I always think the racialism and all of that stuff and blaming any one group, like it always just leads you down paths where you come to bad conclusions.
Correct.
So it's not that. But there is something where this mix of Christians and Jews and lots of other atheists and all types of weird
Satanists,
Satanists and shit like that in there, this group of people that are very hell-bent on this plan of toppling governments in the Middle East, which they clearly still want to continue doing. I do think that the fact that public opinion is turning against that so much is a very important thing. And so, like you know, like if there's enough
let's walk down
opposition,
that. So let's walk down that rabbit hole of why Israel, of all of the problems that we're dealing with in the world, why focus on Israel?
Well, because I mean, look, I think the worst thing about the American government has been the wars over the last 25 years, and the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and in Syria and in Libya and in Somalia and in Yemen, and where just millions of people have been killed. And like I said earlier, it's just degraded our country.
Stop right there. Okay. That's where I have a disconnect, because I'm thinking to myself, that shit ain't got nothing to do with me. They killing us right here. They killing us right here with Cheez-Its and Red 40 died, right?
Well, okay, but so this fact,
and then they killing us to get parts in the iPhone. They're killing black children in the iPhone, but nobody goes, oh my God, what about the kids in Africa? It's like, oh, we worried about these other kids. But the entire American capitalist system is killing black people in Asia and Africa and South America just to keep this whole shit afloat. But nobody talks about that. It's just like, oh, this 1 million people in an Arab nation then rises to the top as the thing we got to be worried about because they're killed in a different way.
Sure. I mean, I get your point on that. And it is probably true that people being killed by bombs being dropped on them just gets a slightly different reaction than kids being killed because they're like, being forced by local warlords to mine something and dying of like exhaustion while they're doing it or something like that. I'm not saying it's not.
I'm talking about just the IMF and the SDRs, right? Like just the IMF existing in a third world nation creating debt and poverty is enough to.
Essentially the loan shark bully of the world empire that goes around just like essentially like strong arming poor countries into taking on unsustainable debt. And sure, look, I mean, we could be against all those things too. Right. I mean, I'm a complete, like, I mean, I'm a Rothbardian in my heart of hearts. I'm a Ron Paulian in maybe a more practical sense, but I think that we should pull out of all of these organizations. I think the IMF should be abolished, and we
Right,
shouldn't
right.
be,
But
interfering in any of these nations.
so tell
But
me
I
about
do think-
Israel, because I really want to learn why you believe, because all of this stuff is subjective. Let's be clear. I can't say one is more important than the other. Why do you believe the Israel thing is the thing?
Well, it's not. Look, I mean, again, I'm not saying there are lots of things that are very important. The
Right.
reason why I pay a lot of attention to this one and have been very interested to learn about the history. I mean, look, there's several reasons. In part, it's because I'm Jewish and I grew up as kind of an atheist Jew, but Jewish by blood.
Okay.
But I I was always kind of immersed in the pro-Israel version of the story. And as I got more interested in American foreign policy, and I started kind of bumping up against the fact that, Israel, okay. So much of it revolves around Israel. And that's not to say that it's all Israel's fault, but there's just no question that it was one of the major reasons why, and 9/11, I was in New York City during 9/11, and the war on terrorism was kind of during my coming of age.
Yeah.
And Israel is just very related, both in the reason we have this fight with the Muslim terrorists to begin with, and the beef was largely about our support for Israel. It was also about our intervention in the Middle East, but a lot of that was also in support of Israel. And so it was right away, it was not only are we picking this whole fight that now is a legitimate threat to this country, but on top of that, at every single turn, they are using all of their influence, which is not insignificant, in order to get us to continue fighting these wars. And I just think it's not just that it's horrible for the people there, but as I laid out before, I think it's hurt our country tremendously. And so I think that's an important topic. I'm not saying it's the only important topic, and there aren't other things that are. And I
understand your point now.
I don't begrudge anyone who's saying it's not what I'm interested in. I'm not going to focus on that.
Right.
But it's a very consequential relationship. And I guess I also just I really resent the idea that there's a foreign government that's off limits to criticize, or somehow you're kind of viewed as a bad person for doing that. And that essentially in all of polite society, you can't say anything about this very consequential special relationship. I just resent that. And I kind of don't like my people being weaponized against, you know what I mean? I don't like labeling people as bigots, sloppily, and I just never like that. I don't like when any other group does that. I don't like when Jews do it either. And I've just always kind of resented that. So I think that's a big part of why I care this. And also on top of that, I've just read a lot about the history, and I find it really fascinating. No matter what side you're on, it's just a really fascinating history.
Oh, absolutely. I spent years studying it. But I think I finally realized what it was. And I can relate to that. You're this conversation's gone full circle. You're like the Jew coon, right? Just like I would be labeled a coon, but I would be labeled a coon by our boule or our intelligentsia, right? So the power structure of the black community, which is the universities and, the entertainment world, same thing with you. You're you grew up idolizing this stuff. I grew up idolizing Oprah and all of that. And then you come to find out, wait, hold on. Y'all some liberals. Y'all support the Democratic Party. So this is sort of you had a red pill moment, and you I get it now. That makes sense.
Yeah, no, it's I think very similar to that. And, I was, when I did Candace Owens' show the first time, we talked about that quite a bit, but there are these parallels between kind of black conservatives, or at least black people who kind of woke up to the white liberal agenda, and how what the actual impact of that is for black people.
Yeah.
And Jews who were kind of like, wait a minute, we're supposed to blindly support Israel? Well, I don't know. I certainly don't agree with what they're doing here, here, and here.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's really is, it's funny about it, but it's like they do it's the first they call you a self-hating Jew,
right?
If you criticize Israel, and they call you essentially the same thing if you're a black who's like not on the progressive bandwagon. Larry Elder is the black face of white supremacy or whatever, you know. It's like I always just found it to be like and I think you're right that it's the power structure, particularly within both groups. But I always just found the argument to be so like obviously stupid. Like, I mean, I don't know, like, you know, I could listen to, like, when I first started getting real interested in politics, I used to read Thomas Sowell quite a bit, and Walter Williams and guys like that.
Oh, those some premier coons. Okay, yeah.
Yes, right. And then I would see them get labeled those names, and you would just be like, yeah, but like if their argument is correct, then they're the ones who are advocating for black people. Like maybe they're wrong, you know, but like, which I largely don't think they are.
Yeah.
But like maybe like, but you know what I'm saying? So it's like it's always just like, oh, this is obviously just a tactic to like do this. Like you try to like psychologically fuck with people to be like, oh, if you have this opinion, you're going to get labeled with this thing that makes you feel like you're outside your in group. And that's a very hardwired thing in human beings, to not want to feel like you're outside your in group, because that's where you get fucking eaten or killed or whatever. You know what I mean? And so like they kind of attack, but I always was just like, yeah, that's stupid. And then that just makes me resent it more. And I'm like, well, that bullshit's not going to work on me. So now I got to double down with what I was saying. Cause come on, you know? And like, I don't know. That's always been my attitude.
Somebody called me Sammy Davis Jr. Hey, y'all better leave my Jewish homies alone, man. It's my greatest ally. We're going to go to Super Chats. Markel, thank you. He said this was a nice surprise to open YouTube. Appreciate you both. Yeah, Dave Smith is goated, man. Jabari and Judah, a lot of Dave's criticism sounds similar to what the Orthodox rabbis were saying about the Zionist government when Israel was founded. The Zionist leaders don't follow Torah, but claim to be the leaders of their ancestral land. Yeah.
Well, I mean, for sure, like amongst the early Zionists, they were, I think, almost all of them were atheists. They were kind of cynically just like, we'll use the fact that it's the land in the Bible to get all the religious people on board. And there's always been a bunch of religious Jews who like are like, no, you've got this all wrong, dude. Like their argument is that God's supposed to come back and give them that land. And like, you can't just start playing God and go try to take it. You're supposed to wait. However, there also are a lot of religious Jews who do interpret, you know, the Bible to say that, yes, in fact, they should seize a whole lot more land than what they already have. So there's, you know, like any group, there's different opinions.
Oh, man. Somebody, shout out to Heather. Heather said Dave needs a Grifties invite. We got to get Dave to the Grifties. Grifties.com going on soon. Make sure y'all go to Grifties.com. Vote for me for Grifter of the Year. I have not won yet. I've been trying my best to grift out here, and I still have not won. So, yeah, I definitely want to send that invite out to Dave. We got Milo coming out this year. Yeah.
He's nominated?
He's nominated, and he's going to present.
Ooh, all right.
Milo Yiannopoulos, yeah, that's going to be interesting. But he's had a little beef with my boy Alex Stein, so I got to like try and piece it up and shit to get them on stage together.
Oh, yeah, I think I saw that on Twitter. Those guys, it was a flip of a coin that those guys were either going to love each other or hate each other for life. So there you go.
Yeah. I think Jews are overrepresented in Congress and banking and everything else. Simply because, well, I'll say it. They have higher IQs. I'm going to tell you why, though. You know why?
Why is that?
Because black and white people send their kids to public schools.
Hotep, you're a genius. HotepJesus.com.
And a lot of Jews don't. I mean, we look at Livingston, New Jersey. Jews go to Jew schools.
Yeah, well, there is certainly a phenomenon of that, where even in some areas, that are predominantly Jewish, they've actually like kind of like they'll almost, I don't mean this with a negative connotation at all, but kind of take over the public school even and kind of like really get it run the way they want it to be run. But there's no question that there's been look, man, like tradition carries a lot of things with it too. Like there's a reason why so many firefighters are Irish. It's like, well, because that's where Irish people ended up going into being firefighters, and like a whole bunch of, Jews ended up going into finance and ended up going into media and ended up going. A lot of times it's just like what the tradition was and what normal to push you into.
Those are the areas they were only allowed to, right? Like Jews were only allowed to deal.
For many years in Europe, they were essentially forced into the banking sector. So there is definitely some truth to that.
Right.
And there also has been, and I think with my generation, there's probably less of this, but there's no question that the weight that the story of the Holocaust had on Jewish people, particularly in like my parents and their parents' generation, and this feeling of kind of like, oh, we were so up against it and they tried to exterminate us and this could have, and then there was always, I think, kind of like a pressure of like, if you ever get an opportunity to help another Jewish person out, you should do that. If you ever can give them a job or can lift them up, there can do that, you should do that, which, you can call nepotism and think of as kind of a negative thing. Human beings are human beings, and you could also make the argument that like that's what people should do with other people who are in their in group. You know what I mean? And so I'm a little bit ambivalent on that, but I really am, and I've always been this way. But I do not like. I think if you fall into the like really genuinely like hating Jews or hating blacks or hating whites or hating women or hating, like all these different things, I think all of that's a trap. And
Yeah.
when I've seen people who do it, and I think it's negative, it's not wise. It's like, it's bad for you. It's bad for your arguments. It's bad for the broader conversation. That's not my thing.
Mhm.
I also, though, at the same time, it's like, people who are like supporting Israel just slaughtering Palestinians and then turn around and are so appalled by the fact that someone said something mean about Jews on Twitter. I'm kind of like, all right, I mean, cry me a river. I don't know what to say. People say mean things on Twitter. I've never.
You're right.
I guess I've never had sympathy for anyone who's in this space, which I've gotten like a bunch of times. Where like, these people are harassing me on Twitter. People are calling me this on Twitter. It's like, yeah, man, that's the price we all pay for this, and it's a pretty small price. Like,
Yeah.
it really just doesn't matter. This is all in your control, whether or not you care about that.
Yeah, I think that's corny when people be like, like you said, they were applauding, and then somebody says something bad about them, and they're like, censorship. And it's just like, wait, hold up, bro. You just you wasn't saying that last week.
Well, I've gotten into like Twitter feuds with people before where they'll be like, oh, look at what your horrible, followers are saying to me.
Yeah.
And I'll be like, yeah, but look at the replies under what I say. Your followers are saying horrible shit to me too. Like, what? That doesn't win you the argument. I don't know.
I tweeted the other day, wokeness is when men act like women, right? So double entendre there. But yeah, like when you start crying about what people are saying under your tweet, it's like, man, if you don't man the fuck up, man. Do you know what they used to say in the Call of Duty lobbies and the Halo lobbies?
Yeah, that's right. And like, look, it is. I'm not even saying like I love it or it's great.
Right.
It's like I think there's something where it's like I'm from a different time. I'm 41. I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, and it's just there wasn't social media, and it was like, oh, you kind of the code amongst guys was like, well, I mean, if you say something like that to someone, you better be prepared to fight them. You know what I mean? Like there's, and that doesn't exist on Twitter. And so okay, but it is what it is. Okay, that's the way it is. That guy's not right in front of you. You can't actually punch him, and he can just call you a name and get away with that.
Right.
Okay. We're adults. Get over it.
James Lindsay wants to debate. What do you say?
Sure. Yeah,
I think he's
offered
scared.
him. He said he didn't, but
I think he's scared, man.
Look, I mean, I think his argument is got a lot of holes in it. I'll just say that. But at the same time, I don't like. I told him when he was saying he doesn't want to do it. Like that's fine too. If you don't want to do
Yeah.
it, that's fine.
Yeah.
But I was certainly.
But his
I was certainly-
reasoning was
I'm more than willing to.
his reasoning is why I gave him the woke tag, the final strike, because he basically said, this isn't what he said, but like, you're not intellectually on his level. Like, these people aren't worth it. And that's what I hear the left usually use that as an excuse, right? Like, they're not worth the debate.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you got to squabble. Intellectuals got to squabble, and not for themselves, for the people.
Yeah, and there's look, it's a rather convenient thing to say, but it's also kind of like, well, then wouldn't you just, I mean, I'm just saying in our interactions on Twitter, and we both have a around the same size audience, like around the same amount of followers,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just a lot more people are agreeing with me than agreeing with him. Just saying, not saying that proves that I'm right or anything like that, but just a lot more people are agreeing with me. And if you're so intellectually above my level, then you should probably be able to just like destroy me in this argument.
Yeah.
And then you could turn that around and have all those people on your side. I mean, I assume the point of talking about this stuff at all is that you're trying to persuade people to see what you're trying to tell them. And so, but again, I'd be happy to do it. I do think that there's a big split in the kind of within this new Trumpian, like broadly speaking, the people who voted for Donald Trump, the people who are somewhat sympathetic to Donald Trump, the people who are kind of like oppose the current progressive regime. There's a split between some of them who really think like that America ought to be, say, funding the war in Ukraine and funding the war in Gaza right now, and who others are a more non-interventionist or America First type who are opposed to that. And that to me was always kind of the most interesting dynamic in this woke right debate. Like,
yeah.
And so I think that's something that should be debated and discussed and will be, whether me and James debate or not.
Yeah. I think a lot of that stuff has to do with Russia and, more expansionism, right?
Yeah.
Bringing Ukraine into the world liberal order, with NATO and all of that bullshit.
Yeah. That's for sure what the whole war was all about, basically. That's what the war in Ukraine is about. That's, and people could, I know the Ukrainian supporters get offended by this when you say this sometimes, but it's like Ukraine really, I know they like to be like, our people have agency and our people made this decision. And you're like, this is a fight between the world order and the Russian Federation. That's what this is a fight between. And Ukraine just happens to be the pawn on the chessboard that like, this is where they wanted to take this away from Russia because it meant so much to them.
Yeah. And Israel too, though, like the Syria, that's Russia's backyard. This still has a lot to do with.
It's very interrelated, and of course, that's right. There's a whole interesting history on that, but yeah, that's right. Vladimir Putin went in to make sure Bashar al-Assad did not get overthrown last time,
right? And
he wasn't able to do it this time.
Well, he a little busy now,
evidently.
Well, he a little busy right now. I don't think
that's right. Yeah. Well, and Hezbollah also, who was very played a big role in the previous war, was pretty busy with what their war with Israel right now. So there's the two big backers of Assad the last time were both very preoccupied.
And I'm sure that was, a pure coincidence.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Oh man, Dave, I had a fucking fabulous time talking to you as always. Phenomenal work. I'm gonna continue to support you. I love James Lindsay's work. Not all of it, but I'd love to, if I could broker a debate, or if you guys debate on another channel, doesn't fucking matter. I would love to see that debate. James Lindsay, come on, man. Let's make this debate happen. The people need this, I always say in a debate, the only people that actually win or lose is the audience. You can pick a winner, but through debate, you start to see where people agree, and you can write that down and say, okay, this is probably truth. And then where they disagree, you can sort of, decide how you want to take that information.
I 100% agree with you. And I think it's even better. Even sometimes it's for the side who loses, it can be better for them because they have to sharpen up their arguments and they have to rethink some things or whatever. So I agree with you, and I'd be happy to do it if James wants to. If not, no hard feelings. I know we went at each other pretty hard on Twitter, but nothing against the guy. I just think I think the framework he's using is flawed. That's really all.
Okay. Wait, what framework? The framework
just the way he's describing what makes the woke right woke. I think he's starting from his conclusion and then working backward from there. He's saying, I want to label these groups woke, and so I'm going to say, well, it's because of X, Y, and Z reasons. But the reasons, just to me, are not tight definitions. They're not like a compelling, argument. It's like again, he talks about like, identitarianism. And, okay, like every group could be described as identitarian to some degree. So
That's
like,
facts.
what exactly do we mean by that? All politics is to some degree linked to identity.
Yeah.
And again, my point is, I just find it interesting that anybody who supports Israel is going to turn around and be like, you're, like Ben Shapiro, identity politics, you're a Zionist. Like, what do you mean? That's the core of the merge of identity and politics. And whatever, I'm not even saying I'm against that just in theory, but at least admit that. You know what I mean? Like, you can't.
So James Lindsay I think he'd agree with you on that. No,
I don't know.
That Ben Shapiro would fall under the woke right under that categorization.
I'd be interested to ask him questions like that, but that's, if we were to have the debate, maybe we would have gotten to the bottom of that.
Because that was my contention with the woke right, is they were crying about, black people and using racial identity, and then they run around talking all this, white people shit. Oh my God, white people this and white people are oppressed. And I'm like, wait, y'all just said y'all was done with racial identity. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so I get that point too.
But if he's gonna go based upon identitarianism, then that's like you said, that applies to all groups. Well,
I do. Thank you very much for having me on. I did, as I always do. I did very much enjoy this conversation.
Oh, excellent, man! Another classic in the making. Another classic, man. Thank you, African and Mike. He says top 5 conversation of the year. Thank you, bro. Hey, go ahead and hit the leave button. I'll close out the show. And once again, make sure you guys follow Dave Smith. For the people watching the replay, I'll make sure his link's in the description box below. What's your website again?
ComicDaveSmith.com.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Right. ComicDaveSmith.com. Make sure y'all line up. And he's going on tour in 2025, so make sure y'all go cop those tickets, man.
Thank you. I appreciate it, brother. Catch you next time.
All right. Peace. Damn. Non-ID pupils list. I don't know what that means. What does that mean? Amazing conversation. I really wanted to pin him as woke right, but he's, again, I think when we speak of woke right, we're talking about unprincipled people. And I don't think we could put Dave in that category. Dave seems very principled, very, very principled. Thank you, Faustian Spirit. I think he's been consistent within a stance. And for me, it was just like, why is this dude crying about Israel? And then when we finally got to the core of it, when he said, I'm like, yo, black people go through the same thing. We have this red pill moment, like, oh shit, we've been lied to about what pro-blackness is. We've been lied to about the civil rights movement. Civil rights movement is like Zionism to him.
Hotep, you're a genius. HotepJesus.com.
So now I totally get why the guy is going ham on his peoples. And I think if there's anybody who's going to have any problem with the Zionists, it should be a Jewish guy. If there's anybody who's going to go against the black boule, it should be a black guy. But shout out to Israel. Hey, BB, if you want to send me that ticket for a 5-star Yelp review, holla at me, man. Shout out to all my kick people. Thank you for tuning in. I'll be back tomorrow, 2 p.m. Eastern time for another episode of the Griff Report. Yeah, our greatest ally. Absolutely. Hotep's been told you tomorrow night with Uncle Hotep at 8 p.m. Make sure y'all tune in. I'll holler at y'all, man.
2, 1, boom. Hotep Jesus.
Of all the Jesuses I know, he's the Hotepiest. Social scientist and YouTube host, Hotep Jesus.
How the fuck do you get a name like Hotep Jesus?
The one and only Hotep Jesus.
Ryan Sharp, better known to the world as Hotep Jesus.
Hotep Jesus. Hotep Jesus. Hotep Jesus.
Hotep, you're a genius. HotepJesus.com.
Somebody said, what do you think you are, some kind of Hotep Jesus?
Ooh,
And I
that's
was just
good.
like, ooh.